All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of Crazy Talk. It is so good to have you here. For those of you who are tuning in for the very first time, Crazy Talk is a mental health Facebook Live talk show where we talk about all things mental health related. If this is not your first time tuning into Crazy Talk, I am so glad that you liked our other episodes and that we've got you back. So, for those of you who might not know, my name is Lee Thomas, and I am your somewhat fearless leader. And I am really excited to be joined today by Tina Chan. So, Tina is currently a Master's of Science candidate at the University of Waterloo's School of Public Health and Health Systems. Her areas of interest include computer based mental health solutions, as well as peer to peer support and use of gamification techniques. During her undergraduate career, also at the University of Waterloo's Applied Health Sciences faculty, she developed the concept of a first aid kit for mental health based off of the coping skills she had had to learn to be successful in academics. The idea blossomed into a self-sustaining business called Panic Anxiety and Stress Support Incorporated, and is the alum of two University of Waterloo incubators, St. Paul's Greenhouse and Velocity Garage. Pass Inc. has sold over 9,000 products to date all across North America. So, Tina, thank you for coming on the show. Welcome. So glad to have you.
So thanks so much for inviting me on your show, Lee. It's amazing what you do, and I'm happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. So, can you tell us a little bit for those of us who, may not necessarily, because I'm lucky I actually am familiar with the pass kit stuff, but for people who might not be familiar with kind of what a pass kit is or what a pass kit looks like, can you tell us a little bit about how that idea came about and what that kind of looks like?
Yeah, so first of all, PASKIT, the PASS and PASS is like the abbreviation of the company name, the Panic, Anxiety, and Stress Support. And the idea is that we have these physical first aid kits for like paper cuts and like small traumas, but we don't really have a mental health equivalent. So when I was in my third year of university, which is some time ago, I was fortunate enough to be in a business pitch competition. So University of Waterloo is a very entrepreneurship-centered school, and they host little competitions for students or student groups to come together and pitch ideas that, um, in this case for me, would be pro-social. So when I was in first and second year, I had a very difficult time with that high school transition into university, and I didn't really have the coping skills to deal with the new transition and the new stressors that was coming at me head on. So for this third year competition, my team and I came up with the idea of a first aid kit for mental health. So we first started looking into literature and say like what exactly stresses people out, especially in school, and what people do to cope with these stressors. And um, a lot of the things that like bothered people were actually very physical, such as lack of sleep um, and distracting roommates and such like that. So I actually have a kit with me today. So this is what it looks
All
like.
right.
So it's very different from the 2015 version you might have seen. So I can just like go through each item and explain it. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
So, as I said, the suite is really difficult for everyone because of loud roommates or just loud construction, especially on my campus. So we have like the earplugs and the sleeping mask.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. And it's one of those things where like, oh, I'm just getting like throwbacks to like, and all of my roommates were wonderful, but I'm like, oh yeah, not being able to sleep because of loud roommates. Yeah, those were the residence days for me.
And also, a lot of people don't sleep during like, yes, your normal, 7 hours a day. A lot of people like take
Yeah.
naps in between classes, and you always see people like napping on the couches. So I was like, well, how can like tensing and releasing your muscles can actually increase your blood flow, which is shown to reduce symptoms of anxiety. We also have these packs of gum. So this is actually some people might have seen them on Dragon's Den, but the interesting thing is that they use a xylitol instead of aspartame. So aspartame is linked to like symptoms of depression or like a higher risk of depression. So we decided to go for a different type of sugar alcohol. But the thing with the chewing gum is that it can increase focus. So you might increase focus when you're doing your schoolwork to like prevent stresses in the future. And it's also really good for grounding, especially like a sharp minty flavors. So if someone is in a state of, state of anxiety or some depressive symptoms are coming on, taking a piece of gum can actually ground them to like snap them back to reality and things like that. And also for people who have difficulty with, like smoking addiction or eating addictions, that's eating, being a piece of gum is great. And the last thing is that we have these flashcards. So they all come with different things, and you could hook them together if you want, or you can take the individual cards and put them in your wallet. So these are based off the behavioral therapy. So for example, um, behavioral therapy is shortened to CBT. So
Mhm.
I might have played them before. So for example, oh, yeah. So for example, we would say something that we do and then offer suggestions on how to change your behavior. And then
That one is speaking to me as someone who consumes a lot of caffeine. I'm like, oh, I do think I need more caffeine. Maybe that's something I should look into.
well, then there's more information on the back. So exactly like, for example, how much caffeine is the upper limit? What is an alternative? And we reference everything just to let people know everything we say is pretty legit and not just taking off opinions on the internet.
Yes. Because there is a lot of information out there where it's like sometimes you're like, that's like a terrible recommendation. So it's so nice to have like information that is good and grounded in like best practices and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Like, there's no I like to think that people who post things online come from like a good place. There's
Mhm.
like informal advice or like non-scientific advice that can speak to you, but it might not speak to everyone. So we like to just make sure that the things that we give are things that can help as many people as possible.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I like that you're like you've kind of got something for all of the senses, right? Like you've got the eye mask for like sleeping, and then the stress ball for feeling, and the gum for tasting, and like all of that kind of stuff. And because I'm actually at St. Mary's University right now doing a mental health first aid course, and one of the things that we teach in mental health first aid when we do panic attack interventions is a grounding technique where we try to engage all five of the senses, right? I'm sure it has another name, but we just call it the 5 4 3 2 1 method, where it's like five things you can. Oh yeah. Oh, fabulous. Yeah. So it's nice to know that like people are kind of getting that consistent information, across platforms and that sort of thing. So when it comes to kind of post-secondary student mental health, if that's the field, since that's the field that you're working in, I do think that there are a lot of kind of misconceptions out there around post-secondary student mental health. Like I hear a lot of the time that and I work with kind of populations of all different ages, and I don't really hear this from youth as much, but I tend to hear this from older populations where it's like, kids these days just don't know how to cope the way that they used to. So what are your thoughts on that?
Let me think. Hmm. So what I can say about post-secondary students is that, again, like when I was a post-secondary student, it was a state of transition and all these new stressors are coming at you. And I think that there is a misconception, perhaps it's enforced by media, but some people expect the stress to be normal. And so they expect to pull all-nighters and expect to be isolated and only focus on schoolwork. And they expect to be competitive with the peers in their class. And some people think like not being able to cope with stress or admitting that you cannot cope with stress is a sign of weakness and it might put you at a disadvantage with your professors and your schoolwork and if you're in a co-op program. So if you're looking for an internship, admitting these to your peers might have people perceive you to be lesser. So
Yeah.
I think that a lot of schools now are focusing efforts on mental health awareness. So bringing down the stigma of starting the conversation. And I think that especially in the past 5 years, it's been really taking off. Like when I was in first year, it wasn't really talked about. It was just like on a poster and that was it. But now, like even in like organic class environments, I do hear people like discussing, oh, I took up meditation because I was really stressed out and it's really helped me. You should also help me as well. Sorry, it might also help you as well. So like even in my organic environment, it's very nice. The other misconceptions is that um, I guess the stigma is only between people. So for example, um, uh, you expect to be discriminated if you have mental health. But one of the for mental health issues, but one of the largest problems is actually self stigma, especially the
Mhm.
high achieving people. So, for example, if you are in pharmacy school and it's a very competitive environment, internship, getting tests, getting good grades for tests, you might think like you are above getting stressed, and it actually limits your willingness to discuss it with your peers as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is that I really struggle with the term like high functioning mental health issues because I think it kind of creates this hierarchy that I don't love, but I know what you mean in terms of being like, a high achieving person and feeling it's just though like mental health is something that happens to other people, right? And it could be because of, the images and the stories that were given. I mean, the media is too easy to blame, but like the images and the stories that were given all over the place that people with mental health issues are somehow, dangerous, dysfunctional, scary other. And you're like, well, that doesn't apply to me. Therefore, I must not have mental health issues. And then sometimes, because you're thinking that your mental health issues end up getting worse and worse because, if you are developing a mental illness, like any illness, it's okay to need help for it. But when people are in denial about it, it makes it really difficult to get that help, right?
Yeah, for sure. And so taking the first step just to like seek a counselor can also be very, very nerve wracking because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people who have never seen a counselor before or aren't educated in what counseling is, the expectations can vary, like they can vary. And sometimes those expectations are very, very scary. And
Yeah.
yeah, and going through the administration process of like seeking a counselor can also be very, very scary because you have to get triage and you have to explain your symptoms multiple times. And sometimes, depending on which system you go through, the wait times can be very, very frustrating. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you're lost or that your symptoms are not like strong enough to be a counselor. So there's been many, many like scary things in going through the psychiatric process.
Yeah. And especially that feeling of, not being sick enough, right? Like that feeling of, oh, I don't deserve this help in some way and sometimes you even hear that from, professionals where you would never hear like, your leg is not broken enough. Like come back to us when it is more broken, right? But we live in a system that is kind of jumping from fire to fire. And so doesn't necessarily have time to invest in making people more fireproof, right?
That's a good way to put it.
And one of the other things, like, I mean, you are clearly like, an innovator and an innovative thinker when it comes to mental health issues. So I know you mentioned in your bio, like you're interested in stuff like peer-to-peer support, stuff like gamification, and we've just kind of talked about what some of the problems in the mental health care system are. So how do you see these innovations, addressing some of those problems in the system?
Yeah, okay. So I'd like to talk about like a story or a thing that we thought about last year. So we've had a lot of customers approach us and ask like, why not make a digital version of your cards or make a app version of your kit? But although I guess e-health technologies is like really really attractive right now,
Mm-hmm.
after we spoke to our end users, a lot of people actually found more help in like tangible products, even if it's just like your fingers touching the rough paper edges and things like that, and like knowing that there's no I guess like phone dysfunction that can get in the way of you accessing your routines and whatnot. So actually, products are that's like preferred by our end users. But at the same time, technology does have a place in like the mental health landscape in connecting people because no
Yeah.
matter how like how good a tangible non-electronic and non-smart product is, it can't really bring people together from place to place. So Going back to the problem of like wait times and whatnot, accessing counseling services or face-to-face counseling services can actually be very, very difficult. But although it's not like a substitute for any professional guidance, peer-to-peer support is more accessible. But not a lot of people use it because I think in the Canadian system, we tend to offer like cheap, non-invasive products before giving people face-to-face support. So group therapy, pamphlets, self-help books, and one of them is also peer-to-peer support. So when people are offered like these options, which could be very, very effective for them, before the invasive, costly like face-to-face options, people might see them as like inferior or like just one hurdle they have to deny before getting the more effective or like perceived more effective face-to-face support. So what I'm doing in my master's research is to understand how we can present these effective but non-attractive solutions in a more like attractive light. So for example, in peer-to-peer support, what if we could borrow techniques and mechanics from like computer games and video games to make them more attractive, not only to youth because they like video games, but to everyone.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds super cool, and kind of like ties into what like we talk about a lot where I'm at in New Brunswick. We're like really starting to talk about that stepped care model, right? Where, you know, that not every single person who's struggling with their mental health in some way needs that one-on-one support and that one-on-one counseling, but we haven't necessarily gotten to a place where there's enough nuance in our conversations around mental health to go, you know, there's varying degrees in mental health care, and what's the most effective option for you isn't necessarily the same thing that was the most effective option for someone else because you have different needs.
Yeah. And then it also creates an attitude saying, if you tell them that the most traditional method is not the method for them, they might again think like their symptoms are not strong enough to warrant that, I don't know, higher cost, and they might also feel inferior. But if there is a way to present all these solutions on like an even playing ground, despite any like cultural assumptions, then I think it's like a step forward in mental health care.
Oh, so yeah, so not even necessarily like a stepped care as just like a variegated care program where it's not necessarily like different degrees of need, it's just different options of treatment.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. That's an interesting way to look at it because I hear so many people talking about these stepped care models, which has made a lot of sense to me, but I'd never really thought about kind of the hierarchical way that can come across, right?
Yeah. And it's not like people are not using peer-to-peer support or online help. Like if you go on Reddit or even Facebook groups, there's lots of people offering support and opinions and whatnot. But once you touch the healthcare system, the formal care, then it's become suddenly inferior, even though it's very effective for those who do seek that informal treatment.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, and we see this obstacle, well, we're starting to see this obstacle in peer support where people are getting more and more willing to kind of, and not universally, but people are beginning to get more comfortable talking about mental health and that sort of thing. And there's kind of this fear for a lot of people about like, if someone approaches me and wants to talk about mental health, I'm going to do the wrong thing, or I'm going to say the wrong thing, or like, you know, what do I do next kind of thing. Yeah. And that education piece, I think, can really be huge in terms of like, if you are, you know, being empathetic and kind and caring and knowledgeable about other resources, like that's a form of peer support, even if it's not, you know, capital P, capital S peer support.
Yeah. I think teaching people to actively listen is also a very, very good thing to do, because most of the time when people are like sharing their experiences, they need like a listener first and maybe a responder second. I think it's a quote that someone shared with me. It's like, listen to understand instead of listening to respond, and I think it's very, very relevant in like mental health dialogues.
Yeah, one of the things that, again, I guess I'm relying on a lot of mental health first aid stuff because it's top of mind for me because I'm teaching it right now, is we talk about how, because humans are social creatures, when I see someone in distress, that's upsetting to me, right? And so sometimes we go in with solutions and we go in with, advice because we want that person to stop being distressed because their distress is distressing me, instead of, kind of taking that Brene Brown empathy approach and really sitting with someone in their pain and just saying, I see you. I see that you are in pain and I'm going to sit with you in this, and not necessarily come in with all these solutions and come in with all these, let's make your problem disappear. It's hard for people to do, though. Definitely.
It's actually really difficult to talk about. We say, oh, we should share your story, you should listen to people, you should spread the awareness. But on the front lines, it's actually a really hard thing to do, especially with friends that you care about and you want to preserve that friendship. And it might be difficult for you to discuss, serious topics like this with people that you care about and people that you want to continue relationships with. But I actually took the mental health first aid course a few years ago. It was hosted also by one of our psychologists. And I think one of the really good takeaways from it is that you want to save a life and not a friendship. So again, that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's difficult conversations to have, but necessary conversations to have. So I can't believe this because this is absolutely flown by. But we're kind of wrapping up to the end of the show now. So Tina, I would love to hear, I'm sure there are lots of people who are going to tune into this and are like, this sounds awesome. I want to get my hands on one of those pass kits. I want to learn more. So if someone does want to learn more, wants to get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
So we do have a Facebook page and a Twitter page as well. They're both My Pass Kit. So that is our handle. And then for more information about purchasing the kit, or if you want to purchase the kit, go to mypasskit.com.
Okay, fabulous. And I will be putting links to those in the comment section down below. So Tina, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. I have to run back and teach more mental health first aid now, which I'm very excited to do, but cutting our show a little bit short. So again, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And if you are watching the show and you are like, wow, this episode of Crazy Talk was fantastic, be sure to tune in next Saturday because we're going to have another episode of Crazy Talk Saturday at 12:30 Atlantic time every Saturday. If you want to get episodes of Crazy Talk directly to your inbox, you can sign up for my mailing list, and I will be putting a link to my mailing list also in the comments. That's it for our show today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Tina, for joining us, and we will see you next time.